take a look at the graphic organizer for the plants, module 13. This is on page 13A. First of all, plants have some characteristics that are common to all plants. They are photosynthetic, which means they use the sun's energy to make their own food in the form of sugar or glucose. That's C6H12O6. This makes plants autotrophs. Auto means self, troph means feed, so an autotroph is a self-feeder. Plants are multicellular. They are made of many eukaryotic cells. U is do. Eukaryotic cells do have DNA enclosed in a nucleus. Plants are also producers. They are the base of the food web. They produce food for the rest of the organisms in an ecosystem. Plants can be classified into two major groups. First, we have the non-vascular plants. In order to understand what those are, you need to understand what a vascular plant is. A vascular plant has a system of tubes and vessels that allows the transport of water and nutrients throughout the body of the plant. And you can see those tubes and vessels in the enlargement on the picture shown. We typically call those veins. Non-vascular plants, on the other hand, don't have those tubes and vessels. So they have to be small and stay close to the ground like moss. So looking at your graphic organizer, you want to follow that arrow over and put the example of moss as a non-vascular plant. Vascular plants, on the other hand, can be divided even further into two categories. First, we have the seedless vascular plants. They do not produce seeds. They use spores instead for reproduction. Like this fern, that is the example that you would need to include on your graphic organizer. It's a fern, and you can see the spore cases on the underside of the fern frond. The seeded vascular plants are those that produce seeds, which basically contain a baby plant. The seeds are the reproductive structure of the plant. And seeded plants can be further divided into more categories. First, we have the gymnosperms, which are plants that produce their seeds in cones, like this pine tree shown. That's your example you need to include. Now, this pine cone is open, so the seeds are already released. Closed pine cones would still have the seeds inside. Angiosperms, on the other hand, produce seeds in fruits, like this tomato, that develop from flowers, and you can see the yellow flowers that eventually formed the tomato. And yes, tomatoes are fruits. Botanically speaking, anything that has seeds inside, even a cucumber, is considered a fruit. We're going to next look at the Stirringer processes that plants carry out. They are living things, so they go through all of the Stirringer life processes. Synthesis means to make, so plants use photosynthesis to make food, and they use protein synthesis to make proteins, just like other living things do. Transport is next. As we just looked at a moment ago, non-vascular plants, the little ones like moss, take in water by osmosis. They have to stay small, but vascular plants have those tubes and vessels to transport water and food. The tube for water is called the xylem, and the tube for food is called the phloem. So that's easy to remember. Phloem and food start with the same sound. These two tubes are together in a vascular bundle. Look at it closely on the diagram shown. We typically call this a vein. So we have the two different types of vascular tissues, xylem and phloem, in the vein. The xylem is moving water up from the roots to the rest of the plant, so that's why the water arrow is going up. The phloem is moving the food from the leaves, where it's made by photosynthesis, down to the rest of the plant, which is why it's going down. Excretion is next. Excretion means to get rid of. Leaves have tiny little openings that are microscopic, called stomata. These tiny little openings are holes or pores, and they allow gases to go in and out of the plant. So look at the diagram. You can see carbon dioxide going in. Plants need that for photosynthesis. You can see oxygen going out. Plants make that in photosynthesis. And that opening is regulated, opened and closed, by the action of the two green guard cells on either side. Another way that plants get rid of waste is by storing their waste in leaves that then fall off in the autumn. And this is true of deciduous plants like oaks and maples and dogwood trees that are losing their leaves in the fall. Respiration is the next Stirringer life process. Respiration means to use oxygen and sugar to produce ATP for energy. All organisms go through cellular respiration. Nutrition comes from the sugar that plants made themselves in the process of photosynthesis. Please remember that food and energy are two separate things. Food is sugar, and then that has to be broken down in the process of cellular respiration to produce ATP for energy. Plants grow and develop when a seed or another reproductive structure is germinated. You can see in the picture how the seed starts to grow and pop up out of the soil and ultimately become an adult plant. Germination starts the process of development into a new plant. Some plants can reproduce asexually, but not all plants. This happens through the process of vegetative propagation, which we learned about back in Module 5. Vegetative propagation occurs when a plant sends out runners, and then little shoots come up off those runners, like the one shown in the diagram, and each of those shoots develops into a new plant. And this is how strawberries, for example, or a spider plant is able to reproduce, but not all plants can do this. Some plants use spores to reproduce. Spores are little bundles of DNA. This can be in a non-vascular plant like a moss, or a seedless vascular plant like a fern. They don't produce seeds, they use spores instead. But what you need to be most familiar with are the seeded vascular plants. Remember that seeds can be found in cones in gymnosperms, or in fruits that develop from flowers in angiosperms. So look at the picture of the dandelion. You have the yellow flower there. That yellow flower has not yet been pollinated and fertilization has not taken place. That yellow flower will eventually be pollinated and will develop a fruit. It's not a fruit that you can eat. It's just a little swollen structure on the underside of the flower. As that fruit swells up, the seeds develop inside, and then that fruit, which is dry, pops open and all of the seeds are exposed to the wind like you see in the diagram. So that yellow flower and the white dandelion, those are the same thing, just at different stages of development. A seed contains a baby plant. Look at the picture. You can see the embryo right there inside the seed, along with a source of food for the embryo. It's not able to photosynthesize because it's not exposed to the sunlight. This is why when you eat seeds like beans, for example, you're getting a lot of nutrition because you're actually eating the food that was stored up for the baby plant. The reproductive structure of a plant is the flower, and you need to pause the video so that you can label the flower on your diagram on your paper. You also need to record the parts of the flower that are male and the parts of the flower that are female. The male parts are called the stamen altogether. This includes the anther, which produces pollen, and the pollen contains sperm, and then the filament, which is a stalk that holds the anther upright. The female parts of the flower are called the pistil. The pistil consists of a sticky section called the stigma, then a stalk called the style, and then down at the bottom, a swollen structure called the ovary. Inside that ovary are ovules containing eggs. So the male part produces the sperm, the female part produces the eggs. Sperm and egg come together for sexual reproduction, just like in any other living thing. So this starts with the process of pollination. Pollination happens when pollen from the male structure is transferred to the stigma, that's the female structure, and it sticks to the stigma. But we're not finished. That sperm in the pollen has to meet the egg down in the ovary. So a pollen tube will grow through the style, And that allows the sperm to dig down and reach the egg in the ovary, and that allows for fertilization. Once we have fertilization, then a seed starts to develop. That seed is ultimately going to need to be dispersed. And so there's lots of different types of mechanisms that allow for this. In that first picture, you have what we call a sweet gum ball. It can stick to an animal's fur and get moved from place to place that way. Berries contain seeds. Animals eat berries and then they poop out the seeds. So that allows them to be dispersed. Next, you see a coconut, which is hollow, so it floats in the water to a new location. The last picture is a maple leaf. We sometimes call those helicopters because they spin around if you throw them up in the air, and those are adapted to be carried by the wind. The last during growth life process is regulation. Regulation means to control, and so this process starts with hormones. Hormones in a plant, just like in any other living thing, regulate growth and control responses to stimuli. There are 3 hormones that you need to know. The auxin hormone is for cell elongation, cytokinin is for cell division, and ethylene is for fruit ripening. These hormones allow the plants to respond to stimuli, and the plant's response to stimulus is called a tropism. There are 3 types of tropisms that you need to know. A phototropism is a plant's response to light. You can see the plant bending toward the light. A geotropism is sometimes called gravitropism. That's the plant's response to gravity. You can see in the picture that the stem is growing up even though the plant's laying on its side. And then a thigmotropism is a plant's response to contact. You can see the vine winding around the stem or the stick. That's the plant's response to contact.